All right. Hello, Education to the Core. Emily Garcia here today with you. Today, I've got a very special guest, Christopher Olson. Christopher Olson has been a member of Team ETTC since September, October of next year. He brings so much expertise to the table. He started out as a blogger, turned into a vlogger, and now a podcaster. And he has had his fingers in some resources such as the SEL resource that we're going to be talking about. So he is so multi-skilled, and we're very blessed to have him on the team. Chris comes with 13 years of experience. He has a dual degree in special education and elementary education. He's got his master's in special education and 60 credit hours towards your doctorate of special education. So we have the best of the best. We're truly honored to have him here tonight. And we are going to be chatting all about one of the things that he's super passionate about, which is SEL. So please welcome Chris. Let him know in the comments that you're watching. Say hello, Chris. And Chris, tell us, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Of course. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I don't know if I could follow up, the great introduction that you just provided. I think hearing it sometimes you're like, oh gosh, like that sounds like so much. And it's just one of those things where I think when it's like a passion like this, and especially in regards to behavior and classroom management and SEL, that it doesn't feel like that much work, but it's just one of those that when you're so passionate about, you want to learn more and you want to keep doing things like this. And thank you so much for the opportunity of not only joining the team of Education to the Core. I honestly can't believe it's almost a year now. Like I'm hitting my anniversary. But also more importantly, doing the SEL resource with everyone. Like it's been amazing just to share such a passion of mine. So thank you.
Yeah, well, we're very lucky to have you, and I'm really excited for the teachers that are tuning in right now to learn a little bit about you and your classroom and a little bit about the SEL and of course the resource that you played a major part in creating. So really looking forward to hearing more about that tonight. So we'll just kind of get started. So give us a broad definition of what SEL is. I'm just going to preface this with, we definitely needed it in the beginning stages of creating this product because we're like, oh yeah, let's do SEL. I've kind of taught that in my classroom. And then, we bring on Chris and we're teaching character. Well, we think we know SEL is character education. So he really had to get clear with us on what it is. And I would like to share a little bit on that with you guys. So Chris, if you could give our viewers really the definition of what is SEL?
Sure. So it's one of those things where SEL's not really a new concept in truth. Mm-hmm. Like our students' emotional and social well-being has always been in the forefront and important for our students. And I think as educators, we kind of always strive to foster our students' growth and learning in all areas of development, not only academic and social, but also emotional. Mm-hmm. And I feel, however, in our current society, our students face more challenges now than ever before. So it's not just in the classroom, it's their daily lives. And those challenges really kind of just build and made that importance of that need for SEL. So I guess SEL in a way, so according to CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, is, and I kind of put this in direct quotes here and I wrote it down. So sorry if this sounds a little robotic, but I'm going to read exactly kind of what that is and I'll expand a little bit. But it's the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals. So kind of thinking about that, I feel it kind of goes back to that initial conversation of character development and SEL and kind of what's the difference between the two. So I think a lot of classrooms across the country do character education and they think, okay, I got it covered. But SEL kind of provides that opportunities for individuals to understand kind of the why of things. It's the perspectives that they have and that create their values and beliefs in character ed. So character ed tells you what values to have rather than teaching individuals to be aware of what they already have. So I feel that's the biggest difference. And I think another important distinction between the two is that character ed primarily focuses on developing moral and morally responsible individuals. In comparison, SEL is about being self-aware, developing those relationships, and making appropriate and responsible decisions. So kind of stemming from that, there's an awesome blog that we have that is character education or social emotional learning. And not to plug anything, but if you're a podcast person, we also have a great podcast that Education to the Core, where the primary things are, that we also have an episode purely just dedicated to social and emotional learning and character education, where I really, really dive into the two and kind of talk about the differences of each. So there's a couple different avenues to learn a little bit more about them.
Well, thank you for that so much. And truly, someone like me who is more of a listener, I think the podcast would be really helpful. So for anybody listening right now, if you want to just check it out on iTunes, Spotify, my gosh, you've got them hooked up with basically any podcast station that they might have.
Yes, we do. And if there is a podcast station out there that you listen to that we don't have it on, contact us and I will make sure to get it there.
And he will. Yeah. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And truly to be doing the deep work in SEL that you're doing, compared to what maybe our educations were, or my first year of teaching even, I feel a little bit of guilt because there's so much more when it comes to SEL. And I think it's so much more culturally responsive to what our students are needing. And I just wish that I had the information that I'm looking at right now with your blog post, your podcast, and the amazing SEL resource that you have really spearheaded to create with the primary version. It's just incredible what teachers can do with SEL. So I want to kind of dive in a little bit more on that. You have the questions that I sent you, right? I'm going to do them in order. So I just want to make sure that, okay, if anything is redundant, just tell me. I already answered that, but I kind of want to go in order.
No, thanks a lot for ruining everybody. Everybody was thinking probably now watching this that, ooh, he's going to be asked questions and not know. And oh boy, that was the perfect answer. Not thinking that, oh yeah, I already knew the questions I was going to be asked.
Yes, and see, this is where my interview skills are not as good as yours. See, Chris and I were talking before, and I said, you know, I'm kind of nervous because you interview people all day for the podcast and the vlog, and I know you're going to point out where I'm messing up, and you did a very nice job of that. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, not at all. Not a mess up. Just kind of just stealing my thunder a little bit is all. That's it.
That's why we love you, Chris. All right. So tell us what your experience is with SEL in the classroom.
Sure. So throughout my educational career, kind of like you gave a very small snapshot of it, like I said, I was always personally drawn to behaviors and in particular classroom management. And I think you always brought up a good point earlier when you said kind of wishing things were a little bit different and a little bit more like meat and potatoes in our like undergrad and, you know, teaching kind of pathways of the courses that we get. And we always have that like one classroom management class. I don't know if you had, you know, just that, you know, that one special one, but it never really taught classroom management. It was more of how to set up your room and how to create transitions and what to cover and what your classroom should look like. It's never really dealing with the behaviors. So like you said, I had the dual in special ed and early and elementary ed. And my first classroom teaching job was in early intervention, special education. So I started and began, and I was like, okay, not to play the gender card, but I was the guy. So I got all the behaviors. I got the aggression, which I was like, oh my gosh, freshly 21-year-old at day after graduating college. Here I am thrown into this classroom where like daily on the hour, like even less, getting bit, kicked, hit, spit on. I'm like, what am I doing? So it was really at that moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going to really just take it. I'm going to really use this as inspiration for not only myself, but my students, and kind of just see what's out there. And kind of just really researching and applying those practices that many, I'm sure, we are already doing, and we just don't even know it. And then, trauma-informed practices came along. And again, this is something that many of us are already doing in our classrooms. It's just looking at it through a different lens. And I feel SEL is the same way as trauma-informed. Also, another big thing for me is equity and equitable practices. So those are really like my two biggies and passion of mine is it equitable and is it trauma-informed? And I feel SEL, and especially this resource, really aligns with both of them. So yeah, so that's really kind of like my main experiences, and kind of personally, because we always add that personal touch to our space, is I'm really into yoga and music. So I know, since I'm a huge fan of both of those, kind of what that does for me as an individual personally. So I wanted to bring them both into my space and try it with my students because I wanted to share that experience with them.
So cool. We're getting so much more than what a typical SEL unit would get, because with your experience with music and trauma-informed practices, equitable practices, and yoga, I'm sure you've spiraled a lot of this into this resource. So
absolutely, yeah. It's important too, because I feel there are good SEL programs out there. I want to preface with that. However, if your district doesn't have one or won't pay for one, and you are like me, you have to piecemeal so much, because there's not just one resource out there that's not only, cost effective, but more importantly, teacher friendly and student friendly. So it's really taking all of these pieces and putting them into one place, so you don't have to spend the countless hours trying to find things that might work. And, oh, I wonder if anybody ever tried this in the classroom type of thing. And it's purely a resource that is teacher made, teacher tried, and things that I've been doing in my classroom for the last 13 years.
We appreciate that so much. And teachers are probably watching thinking, yeah, I have to piecemeal all my other core subjects. Let's take SEL off of our plate. It's already right there. So I'm sure they appreciate that so much. So with that said, thinking of, all of the new teachers that are coming in this year, I'd imagine we probably lost a lot with COVID. We also have some third-year teachers who might not have been in the classroom, who have to do the deep SEL work. Even though they did it virtually, it's different this year. So if we're a teacher that maybe doesn't have an SEL program, character education isn't really pushed, they're kind of thrown into the classroom 5 days before the school year starts and said, okay, teach the students. Tell us why a teacher would need to, well, I guess tell them why SEL is important.
Sure. So SEL really fits in with the current educational views and practices of the terms why. And I kind of touched a little tiny bit on this before. Like right now, the curriculum is really pushing us to allow students to understand the why of an academic concept. It's, no longer math is, 5 + 5 = 10. Now it's taking that extra step of understanding why it equals 10. Like, how did you, formulate the problem? What steps did you take? And having that understanding and that background knowledge of it. It's not just kind of how I was in school. You memorized your facts, you were tested on them. That was, I'm not going to thank you for all my teachers, but it was, memorize and purge type of scenario. It's no different when it comes to social emotional learning. I mean, SEL competencies that be taught, modeled, and practiced and advance that equity within the classroom. So when SEL's carried out effectively, it really naturally creates a caring and positive environment. So these skills of nurturing and caring and these appropriate relationships with students and adults really kind of just builds those personal experiences, strengths, supports that, children foster, and those strong relationships foster between that growth and collaboration. So it just builds an overall better human being, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because 2020 really brought about a lot of the mental health, awareness and the importance of having a therapist or, counseling. I can't imagine how impactful programs like this are going to have on children, because they're going to have the emotional intelligence before it's too late, even if they don't have the resources to the internet where they can look up therapists on TikTok or, just little things like that. We're truly fostering that social emotional learning before it becomes a problem in adulthood. So I think that's amazing the work that you're doing. All right. Thanks. So yeah, tell us what's inside this program and how it can help a K-2 teacher.
Sure. First, I would say that's a great question, Emily. Gosh, where do I begin? But now people know I have the answers and questions that I already thought. No, I think it's one of those things where I kind of want to preface this of going back to that question before of like the why, and you were bringing up a good point about having like the therapists and the social workers and the school counselors. And I think that's one thing a lot of teachers are leery and weary about, of kind of just, I'm not a counselor. I'm not counseling students. And I think this is definitely the resource that will help you. It's not about counseling students, because again, I'm not a counselor and that's not what we do. It's really just building that positive and appropriate relationships that will guide the conversations and create a safe and caring environment for students to learn. So overall, this is a year-long resource that covers 5 main pillars that kind of align with CASEL, that were kind of self-awareness. And now I'm trying to this is off the top of my head. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And it's kind of important that research shows that it's kind of taught in a very sequential order. And this resource aligns directly in that order. And we also tossed in another important pillar in our minds, which was growth mindset. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's one of those things where you don't worry. It is a lot, but we also, besides that awesome table of contents there, we included a timeline of how long you should spend on each unit by week. Because again, that research shows it's important to do this in sequence. And each pillar, as you see, kind of has multiple sub-pillars. So it kind of has like 2 main components. Each pillar and sub-pillar has 2 main resources in this SEL unit, resource guide and student slides. And I think kind of one caveat in a way that I want teachers to know is that this is not a scripted daily lesson. And I think that's kind of important to put out there very first, because I don't want teachers expecting, because again, it's one of those things where yes, it's cost effective, but we want you to know exactly what this is. So it's not really a scripted plan. And I personally feel that no SEL resource is or should be, because you know your students best and you know what they need. So you can adapt the resources and materials as such, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as I said, it's kind of 2 main kind of topics, a resource guide and student slides. So the resource guides is kind of a one-stop shop in a way, if you will. They offer you as an educator background knowledge of why this topic is included in the series. And then it gives some opening discussion questions and a day one activity to introduce the topic to your students. And I mean, all of these activities that I'm kind of talking about are in each and every single subpillar. So there's a guide for every single pillar. After this, even though there's an extensive list of student activities as well. And these activities can include anything to games, self-created like worksheets and organizers that are included in the unit to pair with the lessons, and other fun interactive items as well. We also thought out a lot, and it's very important that we also covered cross-curricular activities for those teachers that kind of don't have, a large chunk of time to teach SEL in one sitting. And this is explained in the unit too, is it offers kind of that leeway of students and teachers to create their own expectations of the resource, where they can piecemeal and pull kind of a 5-minute morning lesson here and a read aloud there. So we included cross-curricular activities in each guide as well to pair with those reading lessons and math lessons, science and social studies. There's just so much. This resource and guide has book lists with read alouds, as well as videos that are educational, short, but match the discussion of each topic as well.
And hand selected by you, which is amazing.
Hand selected.
Yes, they're already vetted. So you know that, whatever video you pull up is going to be vetted by Chris himself. So
yes. And I kind of already gave it away a little bit. One of my passions was kind of movement activities and music. So there's also, a list of mindful moments and reflective activities in each guide as well. And that's movement breaks, breathing exercises, think, pair, shares activities. And I think last but not least, is kind of student conversation starters, where we have conversation cards that I kind of have, you can use in whole group lessons, small group lessons, or depending on your students, they could be placed in a center activity where, it's one station of a center where students go, think about it, reflect, either a writing prompt or discussion there. So I think, yes, it is and sounds like a lot, which it is. However, the guide will explain and walk you through everything very, very quickly, and it will allow you to use them however you wish. And I think that's the biggie for me, is that there's a lot of flexibility that you can create this and make it your own for you and your students.
Absolutely. Well, and you kind of answered the next question, but I'm going to throw a little wrench in your question. So here's where it's off the grid. So I guess, what does a typical SEL lesson look like? You did explain a little bit of that. And I'm sure a lot of teachers are thinking, I don't have time to teach an SEL lesson. So maybe that's a part of it. How do you squeeze these little components into your day? What would you do in your classroom, Chris?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one question that I think I get asked the most. And people usually dislike the answer that I give them, though. So I don't know if you're ready, but a typical SEL lesson looks like whatever you want it to look like. And I think that's the coolest thing about SEL, is that it fits into whatever you want it to fit into. So like I kind of said a little bit, if you have a dedicated chunk of time each day, that would be absolutely amazing. That you can really sit down and pull a lot of these things from the guide. But if you don't and you aren't afforded that luxury, which I'm sure the majority of us are, I mean, I personally even can think of, a chunk of time with everything added to a teacher's list now. So I kind of, do a 5-minute thing here, 5-minute thing there. And one important piece is a student kind of a morning check-in, which falls into our second main piece of this unit. So I talked a lot about the guides, but we also have student slides that are included in here as well. And this, I feel, is a great opportunity to kind of fit in how I would use this kind of throughout my day. Like you asked, Emily,
Yeah.
is the student slides can really be utilized in one or two ways. You can project it on the screen and kind of have students use a journal down or discuss openly once students are comfortable and to that level. Or you can print it off and have a page every single keep as their own. You can keep them in a binder, make a, like an SEL journal out of it, where students can also always go back to reflect and see exactly what those mindful moments and reflective activities were. So the first section is like that check-in, like I said, which is how I always suggest to start off the day, because it kind of gives you a good feeling of how each student is walking into your room with. There's also a section there where there's mindful moments and reflective activities that were in the guides that I discussed. This will kind of help students remember what they look like and feel like so that they can be utilized down the road. And kind of I go to sections where I try these before recess and then reflect and do it again after recess to kind of get them back in the mindset. So there's another small piece of our day. And the last section is a "this happened to me" section. So, I mean, what student doesn't like sharing things with you as their teacher? I mean, I know once one person starts a story in my room, I mean, everybody has a story and everybody wants to share and talk about it and tell you. This is their opportunity to do so and not take away any precious academic time. So just like the guides, it may seem like a lot, but that first slide will kind of break down each section, how I use it, how you can use it. And just like the case with most of Education at the Core's products, we are always here to walk beside you and guide you along the way. So I think it's important that this resource of SEL really fits into, Emily, your true belief of Education at the Core, your kind of guiding line, and it just fits with all the other amazing resources that Education at the Core has to offer.
Absolutely. Well, and I did not pay you to say that. Like, I really appreciate it for all of those that are listening. Like, that's genuinely how truly I believe that this is a genuine reflection of all the hard work that we see on Team Education to the Core. And I truly want to thank you for all of the time and dedication that you've put into this. I also want to mention, you know, a lot of our students, like you are saying, they want to share their story. They have something to tell you. And a lot of times during the day, our students could be facing trauma, or there may be a story that would not have been shared had this slide not been created. And this is our opportunity where if there's something that needs to be recorded, or if there's a concern that we need to address with maybe a parent or even a social worker, this is where we would get that information.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody has a story, and more importantly, everybody should be heard. And I think this resource allows some of that, to at least open up the doors to allow that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So the next one, you know, Chris, I'm sure you've had an established SEL program, and I'm sure you've gone without. You know, as much as we like the idea of SEL, I know in my school, our principal came into the first meeting for strategic planning and said, actually, it wasn't SEL, it was at PBIS. You know, we're going to do this program. but they never got any resources. They kind of left us to the wolves to figure out what it is, you know, and I feel like SEL can be the same thing. So what impact does having an established SEL program have on students?
Sure. And again, yes, I have been in those meetings. I have been tossed things, and I do feel this is going to be coming a lot of people's directions this year. I think districts and schools are trying to grab something that they feel might address some of the barriers from the pandemic, things that students and families are still dealing with on a daily basis of how they come in and sit in a desk and function and learn. So SEL regards things like attitude, perspectives, contributions to society. So like I said, SEL is really not a specific skill, but understanding of why. So I think that's the real impact here, is once they have the understanding of the feelings that they do, then they can build those coping mechanisms and those strategies to better deal with those situations.
Yeah.
So by identifying these, they can begin to independently complete them on their own, resulting, and here comes the best part, resulting in less time from a teacher dealing with those behaviors in a classroom management setting or tattling. And I mean, the list goes on. So just like any classroom management tool, the work has to be put into it. And I think a resource like this will definitely do that trick.
Yeah, and it ensures that the teachers won't miss those important lessons that otherwise they might have just because they got too busy with X, Y, and Z. We have a million things on our list. This is one less thing that we have to think of before we come into the classroom. It's right there. So yeah. Love that. And I also think about like whack-a-mole or putting out fires. You know, it's like if we empower our students with the vocabulary to work through their problems on their own, come October, we're not going to be playing whack-a-mole anymore. They're going to be dealing with their own stuff. So, you know, this program may be a little bit more time up front, but it is absolutely worth it because you end up saving on instructional time. And I'm sure, Chris, you can definitely attest to that. So, all right. So this is a part where you can brag. And I really want you to tell me your favorite part about this primary SEL program that you worked so hard for 6 months to design. What is your very favorite part about it, Chris?
Oh gosh. Well, after a very long 6 months of tears and no.
Yeah.
This is probably like the hardest question that we've asked. I mean, gosh. I love the fact that we included cross-curricular activities in every single resource guide for each pillar and sub-pillar. I think those are really important, and often even when I was kind of creating them and thinking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this activity I've done before, like really fits like perfect into science. And like I would have never thought to be like, oh, okay, well, when we're teaching about natural disasters or volcanoes, like great, like we can, you know, build in impulse control and how things build up inside of us. And if we don't use the tools that we have, I mean, we can explode. And that's something that I deal with as an adult. Like I still have issues with that of I just hold everything inside of me, either anger or, you know, being upset, and things building till you just break.
Yeah.
And I've been there and I know that it feels like, so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, great. Like, let's, you know, not only science of how things are building and kind of that volcanic eruption, you know, the same applies to SEL, and you can talk about the two. So although that's great, I think I still am going to pick the mindful moments and typically the movement breaks and breathing exercises. Again, you know, just because it's such a passion of mine that works great for me, but then also more importantly, my students. And I think if you are like me and you find yourself, you know, oh, I need to take a couple deep breaths.
Yeah.
More than likely, your students will also need to take a couple deep breaths. So you might as well just do it together.
Well, and both of those things that you mentioned have a common theme. You've got your mindful moments and you have your cross-curricular integration. If at all that you guys are getting kickback from your administration on, we don't have time for this, mindful moments are your brain breaks, and your cross-curricular activities, you're doing science, you're doing social studies, you're doing reading, whatever it might be. You've got that opportunity to say, you know, we're going to bring SEL into every aspect of everything that we do. And I truly think you did an excellent job of doing that. And there's truly no reason why any primary teacher couldn't do a little bit, just a fraction of what you've provided. And truly, I believe if they did even 5% of their day, they would have a transformational culture in the classroom, and it truly would make that year so much better on students, on teachers, on the school. So I appreciate you for being so intentional with this resource, Chris.
Thank you. Absolutely. It definitely is very, very purposeful and intentional. And I think it's great. No, you said I could brag. You said I could brag. No.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm just really excited to, you know, use this myself, and started this already. And, you know, we're 6 days in to my school year with second grade. So I've been, you know, starting the dialogues already and getting the routines and expectations in, and doing some of this already. So I'm excited to have a resource in my hands that I could just go right to.
And I hope you tell your students that you are a published author, because that is what you are. Do they know that you created it?
They do not know that I created it, no.
Maybe one day they can learn that.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I appreciate your time, Chris. And, you know, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You know, and I want to give our teachers an opportunity to reach out to you if they have any questions after watching this. Where can teachers direct their questions? How can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So, probably the easiest way, I'm thinking, is they could actually, you know, if they're watching this video, they can comment right on the video. I'm really, you know, I always like to jump into dialogue and the community in all of our Facebook groups, the Fearless First Grade, Fearless Kindergarten, Fearless Second Grade groups. So I'm heavily involved in all three. And not only could you get my answers on certain things, but, you know, it might start a dialogue for other teachers and other educators out there. So I think that's probably like one of like the best in my eyes, because if you have a question, more than likely, I always say this to my students, if you have that question, I know there's going to be at least 5 others that have the same exact question as you. And the same thing goes to educators. If you're having a concern, or, you know, how will this work? You can guarantee that there are a lot more than 5 that have that same kind of curious wonder. But if you are not open to that, I mean, I'm sure Emily's okay with using the Education to the Core email account. So if I don't know if you want to provide that to everybody too, or like, I don't know, Emily, you tell everybody what's the best way to contact me.
Yeah, no, if you want to get a hold of Chris, I believe you have an email address through Education to the Core, right?
I do. I just couldn't remember it.
Oh,
I'm just trying to think.
I got
like,
you.
I couldn't remember if it was like my full name or if there was like a dot in there somewhere, or I'm like, oh boy, yeah, I was like,
it's just your first name. So Christopher@educationtothecore.com if you want to keep it more personal. Also, the Facebook groups that he shared were Fearless First Grade Teachers, Fearless Kindergarten Teachers, and then Fearless Second Grade Teachers. And truly, that is the best way to contact Christopher or anyone else at Team Education to the Core. You can get to know us in there. There's amazing conversations in there, and truly everyone has a place inside of those Facebook groups. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Teachers, thank you also for your time. We know it's valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us. Again, Emily and Chris, if you guys have any questions directed towards us, feel free to reach out. And otherwise, if you don't, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.